Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm criminal justice reporter Paige Flager, and this is a special episode of This Is Nashville. For the past 4 years or so, I've become sort of obsessed with a really particular part of Tennessee's justice system: how we separate dangerous people from their guns. We bar people from having firearms when they've been convicted of felonies or certain domestic violence crimes. The prohibition is about public safety, in recognition of the fact that people who abuse their loved ones pose a particular danger to themselves, their families, and even their communities. But often, enforcement is lacking, and victims slip through the cracks of the system and are killed by people who never should have had weapons. Back in January 2024, I heard about a place that was trying to fix this system, a sprawling rural county in eastern Tennessee called Scott County. In August, in partnership with ProPublica, we published an investigation about the county and the challenges that victims face in rural areas of our state. We examined how heavily gun rights weigh when placed on the scales of justice. After that story came out, people pushed for their own counties to adopt Scott County's reforms. There was even a bill introduced at the legislature, but it was pushed to next session after the NRA opposed it. Then, last month, a New York theater company called Theater of War had this idea. They wanted to get Hollywood actors to read that story and then invite people to engage in a conversation about it. On today's episode, we're sharing a special produced by member station WNYC in partnership with Theater of War. Brian Dories from Theater of War will take it from here.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm Brian Dories, Artistic Director of Theater of War Productions. I've been directing plays for most of my life, and I believe that great performances have the power to touch us deeply, to wake us up, to open our hearts to new possibilities, to other perspectives, to complexity, to contradiction. And I've come to see that great actors can put us in touch with our emotions so we can have hard conversations about things that sometimes divide us, with humility, compassion, and a clear sense for what's at stake. At Theater of War Productions, we perform powerful texts, and then we pass the mic to people in the audience to share their perspectives, their opinions, their lived experiences, just like all of you, here in this room, and the thousands of people all over the country and the world tuning in on Zoom. Turns out we have a group of community members gathering tonight in a college classroom in Scott County, Tennessee, that includes local judges, a police officer, survivors, and advocates. Our story today is based in Tennessee, in two different rural communities, Scott County and Lewis County. This is a story about domestic violence. Domestic violence happens all around us. It's an American issue. It's a global one, too. This story takes place in Tennessee, where the rates of women killed by men are some of the highest in the country. Most of these murders are committed with guns. In recent years, the gun laws in Tennessee have made it easier for people to buy and sell firearms. Is there anything that can be done to stop the killing? The story you're about to hear is about a couple of communities that are attempting to answer this question, not just by changing their legal approach, but also by helping perpetrators to change. The article's called, "In Rural Tennessee, Domestic Violence Victims Face Barriers to Getting Justice. One County Has Transformed Its Approach." It was written by Paige Flager for ProPublica and WPLN in Nashville. The actors who will be reading the piece are Debra Winger, Josh Hamilton, Daphne Rubin-Vega, and Bill Irwin. Please welcome them to the stage.
Before rural Scott County remade itself into a model for managing domestic violence, Jade Peters didn't know where to turn for help.
Her ex-boyfriend was stalking her and threatened to kill other men who talked to her.
She knew he had a gun, but so did many people in Scott County, and she didn't think the justice system would take her seriously.
One night, in 2009, Peters was walking up her steps when she saw someone approaching. As he got closer, she realized it was her ex-boyfriend.
She fumbled with her keys, trying to set off her car alarm.
He pulled his hand out of his pocket. A sudden bright light pierced the darkness, the flash of a gun firing. The bullet tore through Peters' mouth and throat, with fragments lodging in her spine.
When she was able to drag herself into her house to call for help, she remembers avoiding her reflection in the mirror, not wanting to see what damage the bullet had done.
A few years ago, Scott County decided that the system that Peters and other domestic violence victims across the state contended with wasn't good enough. Tennessee consistently has one of the highest rates of women killed by men, and most of those homicides are committed with a gun.
Yet, over the years, the state has loosened its gun laws, making it easier for people to buy and carry firearms. The state bars domestic abusers and people with felony convictions from having guns, but ProPublica and WPLN, the public radio station in Nashville, found those laws are rarely enforced.
Tucked into the Appalachian foothills along the Kentucky border, Scott County recognized that victims in rural areas face unique barriers. There are few resources like domestic violence shelters.
Law enforcement and the courts typically lack staff and training, and cultural attitudes about domestic violence and guns can make officers and judges less likely to believe women or more reluctant to take firearms away from abusers.
The county completely overhauled the way it handles domestic violence cases. It brought most of the agencies that deal with domestic violence into one building called the Family Justice Center. It then started one of the state's only court programs solely dedicated to handling domestic violence cases.
And vitally, the county took steps to better ensure that people subject to domestic violence charges or protection orders don't have guns.
Jade Peters said that if the reforms had existed when she needed them, she would have known where to get help.
It would have made a difference.
Separating dangerous people from their guns is an issue that much of the country grapples with, but in Tennessee,
it's even more inconsistent in these rural communities,
said Heather Herman, who oversees a statewide group that studies domestic violence homicides from her office in Nashville. She said in rural areas, judges are more likely to consider things like whether abusers hunt or have jobs that require guns.
In rural Lewis County in Middle Tennessee, for example, Judge Mike Hinson said protecting gun rights weighs heavily in his decisions. It can be hard to justify signing an order of protection, which can bar someone from coming near the victim, contacting them, or having firearms if a gun wasn't involved in the domestic violence incident, he said.
It's those cases where I try to balance a person's rights because they do have a Second Amendment right, and they do have a right to protect themselves, and they do have a right to get a job. That's a tougher balance.
Judge Hinson said.
It's a balance he acknowledged he doesn't always get right.
Even if a judge orders someone to give up their guns, there's a glaring gap in Tennessee's system.
It's one of about a dozen states that allows someone to give their gun to a third party, like a friend or relative, instead of a law enforcement agency or a licensed firearms dealer.
And it doesn't require that the person be identified to the court.
In such cases, someone could say they gave up their guns but still have access to them, advocates for domestic violence victims said.
Scott County, in the rural eastern Tennessee Appalachian foothills, saw that gap and decided to change its firearms form, requiring abusers to name the person who is holding the guns and list their addresses. That person has to sign a form to verify they have the guns.
Victim advocates said Scott is the only one of Tennessee's 95 counties that has done this.
It's difficult to measure Scott County's success because the numbers are so small. But data from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation shows that while domestic violence incidents have fallen slightly across the state, in Scott County, they've dropped by more than half.
No other rural county in Tennessee has yet followed Scott's lead. And throughout the states, old attitudes prevail.
On the other side of Nashville, from Scott County, is a region of rolling hills and cropland where guns and hunting are also a big part of life.
This area of Middle Tennessee is represented in Congress by Representative Andy Ogles, a Republican who in 2021 sent out a Christmas card of his family holding guns. Ogles didn't respond to calls or emails from WPLN and ProPublica, but has told reporters he didn't regret the card.
That culture permeates all the way up the justice system to judges.
When you have a really insular community, a really gun-focused community, and often a community that maybe has some misconceptions or stereotyping of what domestic violence is and what it means, then you have judges, not always, but often, who carry those same beliefs.
Herman, the researcher from Nashville, said,
Judges in Tennessee have an incredible amount of power in how they run their courtrooms, which can greatly affect domestic violence cases.
If a case lacks obvious physical signs of abuse, judges may fall back on their own notions about domestic violence, which research shows favors the defendants.
In Middle Tennessee's Lewis County, Judge Hinson said he sees himself as a representative for the culture. The county proudly boasts one of the largest collection of mounted trophy heads in North America. The old courthouse has a bullet hole from when a man going through a divorce brought a gun to confront his wife. The new courthouse is across the street from a store advertising that we sell ammo. With only about 12,500 residents, the county is the type of place where most people know each other, which can make domestic violence difficult.
Since 2014, most of those cases have gone before Hinson, a Lewis County native with icy blue eyes and gray hair. Some folks around Lewis County call him the people's judge. He often wears a quarter-zip sweater or a button-down shirt in court instead of a judicial robe. And he speaks plainly, like he's talking to a friend he ran into in the store instead of someone in a jailhouse jumpsuit.
Hinson's casual attitude and off-the-cuff remarks caused him to be suspended by the Administrative Office of the Court's Board of Judicial Conduct in 2021. In one case, in which he denied a woman an order of protection, the board said he made a
demeaning
comment telling the couple that another judge would
wade through that
in their divorce. He later apologized for the remark.
Sometimes, Hinson said, he finds the law constricting and prefers to take his own approach.
Once, that resulted in him dismissing hundreds of traffic tickets because he thought the community was being overtly targeted. It made him popular among some residents, and less so with the Tennessee Highway Patrol.
I don't believe the law was made for us to worship,
Hinson said.
I believe the law is a tool.
That applies to the domestic violence cases he sees in his courtroom, which, he said, often result from addiction. It's a struggle Hinson himself relates to. He said he had a drinking problem and anger issues that ended his last marriage, something he shares with the men who appear before him in court.
Some people just might need a little anger management,
Hinson said.
Some people, it's just a bad day and the only time it's ever happened.
Hinson also said he thinks some women overuse protection orders to gain the upper hand in a divorce case or custody battle.
This is stuff that we hear from every corner of the state.
Herman, the researcher from Nashville, said.
In these small towns in particular, people talk. They know what the judge has said to other people. They know how other people's cases have gone.
Some victims who went through Lewis County Court said Hinson's sympathy for the men made them feel dismissed or like they were the ones being reprimanded.
Multiple victims asked not to be named because it's a small community and they worried it would affect their cases.
WPLN and ProPublica also sat in on Hinson's court.
In February, Hinson admonished a woman who sought a protection order against her ex-boyfriend after he fired a gun into the ceiling during an argument.
Instead of granting the order of protection, Hinson put the man under a no-contact order, which didn't require him to give up his firearms.
He told the man he couldn't reach out to the woman, but he also told the woman her ex-boyfriend wouldn't be held responsible if she contacted him first, and he replied.
If that happens, Hinson said,
I'm going to take his side.
And he urged her not to do what some women do, reaching out to their partners after leaving court to work out their problems.
We're not going to be doing that,
he told her.
A month later, another woman in Hinson's court seemed surprised by the way the judge spoke to her estranged husband after he assaulted her.
Instead of chastising him about his behavior, Hinson appeared to try to motivate her husband by telling him his wife thought he was
A great guy.
The woman sitting in the courtroom that day leaned over to a victim's advocate and said,
I never said that.
That was the first part of Paige Flager's piece from WPLN in Nashville. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll hear the rest of the story before our audience responds.
It's important to know that violence is a disease, and the only way you're going to cure it is through resources and healing.
We have to acknowledge that guns don't kill people, people kill people.
I do think people can change, and echoing what everyone said in this room, I think it's a lot of systems that fail an individual.
I'm Brian Dories, and this is Theater of War Productions, presented by WNYC. Stick around.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org. Funding for This Is Nashville comes from Burr and Foreman Law Firm, serving clients with transactional, litigation, and regulatory needs. Discovering how each client defines a win and working with them every step of the way to achieve it. Burr.com.
I'm Paige Flager, and this is Nashville, a special episode in partnership with Theater of War.
I'm Brian Dories, and you're listening to Theater of War Productions, presented by WNYC. Our series invites people to respond to journalism in real time. We just heard actors perform the first part of a piece from WPLN in Nashville. It's a story about domestic abuse and guns, and how the two collide in rural communities in Tennessee, a state that has some of the highest rates of women being killed by men, often with guns. The article began with the story of a woman named Jade Peters who was nearly killed by her ex-boyfriend. The story is set in two communities, Lewis County, where many victims say the pro-gun local judge downplayed domestic violence cases, and Scott County, where Jade lives, which recently overhauled its court system's approach to preventing domestic violence. The actors are Debra Winger, Josh Hamilton, Daphne Rubin-Vega, and Bill Irwin. Here's Debra.
About 200 miles away in eastern Tennessee, as the early morning fog cleared over the Scott County Justice Center, in May, men slowly trickled into the courtroom under a sign in Greek that translates roughly to, "A man's character is his fate." Their work boots thudded on the floor as they found seats on the wooden benches.
All rise.
The bailiff said.
Domestic violence court is now in session.
The men had already been convicted of domestic violence or were subject to protection orders. They were there so that Judge Scarlett Ellis could monitor whether they were keeping up with their probation appointments and other conditions like mental health and addiction treatments.
Ellis looked up over her glasses with a kind smile at the group of men in front of her, the way a teacher might greet her class. Then, one by one, they stood in front of her. She peppered them with questions.
How has therapy been going? Have you avoided contact with your victim? What have you learned in Batterer's intervention class?
Ellis's approach is encouraging but not lenient. When it's clear that the men before her have made strides toward changing their behaviors, she doesn't hesitate to tell them.
One man stood at the podium, his hands clasped behind his back, as he responded to her questions with,
"Yes, ma'am," and "No, ma'am."
He had an interview later that day for a better paying job, he said.
You've changed your life,
she told him.
I can see it. I really can.
Ellis can use her discretion to have those who were doing well come to court less often. But if they're not complying, she can also extend their probation or send them to jail.
Later in the day, when victims came to the domestic violence court for new cases to be heard, They were ushered by a court advocate into a back room to keep them separate from the men they say abused them.
It's one of the many victim-centered changes the court has made. When their protection order hearing comes up, the victim stands at one podium, the offender at another, with the court advocate and a sheriff's deputy between them.
Domestic violence court is held on a separate day from other cases to protect victims' privacy.
I was already embarrassed with all that had happened and being assaulted, and then to have to be in a room with people who had done drugs and stole from others was just more embarrassing and belittling.
One person wrote in a community needs assessment that was conducted before the court was created.
Ultimately, a judge's orders are only as strong as their enforcement, which Scott County has also tried to address. Like many rural counties, the Scott County Sheriff's Department is small and understaffed, but it has a dedicated domestic violence officer to help victims.
I'm their voice.
Deputy Danielle Gayhart said in her raspy twang.
They've done their side of it by getting their order of protection.
Gayhart has listened to jailhouse phone calls to see if an abuser was contacting a victim. She also checks social media. Once, a man posted a picture of himself hunting deer with a gun. When she sees those things, she'll charge people with violating protection orders.
When it comes to anything like that, I'm your girl,
she said.
One of the keys to holding defendants accountable in Scott County is its batterers intervention program.
In other rural counties, attending one can mean a long drive.
In Lewis County, for example, the closest one is over 1 hour away.
Judges in those places often won't list it as a court condition because it's too hard to get to. But Scott County's class is 10 minutes from the courthouse.
During one class, 6 men crowded around folding tables pushed together in a square. "We repeat what we don't repair," was scrawled on a whiteboard on the wall.
The facilitator led them through an exercise on how to recognize the signs of anger in their bodies and stop it before they take it out on someone else.
Feeling hot-headed? Try sticking your head in the freezer. Feeling restless? Take a walk. Clenching your teeth? Chew a piece of gum.
Many of the men are still in the relationships that put them in the court, so creating these plans is urgent.
While the 26-week class is court-ordered, the men weren't shy about participating.
I'm not real good at showing my feelings.
One man said.
I've never have been. You know, I was raised...
You don't wear your feelings on your sleeve.
Another chimed in from across the table.
That's right. Growing up, I was raised that you're a man. You're not supposed to show that because nobody gives a You're supposed to be stronger than that.
Programs like this one have led to change, according to Jade Peters, the young woman whose ex-boyfriend assaulted her in 2009. After the shooting, the ex-boyfriend pleaded guilty to attempted murder and was sentenced to prison. Peters recovered from her wounds and went back to school to become a lawyer, representing clients in Judge Ellis's domestic violence cases.
She said men in Scott County know that when they're brought to court on a domestic violence charge, there will be serious consequences.
Men are somewhat afraid of that,
Peters said.
They're very aware that you can be dispossessed of firearms for a year, and that you can lose a lot of your rights, that you can be sentenced to programs and court appearances.
She said that empowerment for victims and accountability for offenders has had an impact beyond just the court program. The system change has led to broader cultural change in Scott County.
There's still women in bad situations,
Jade Peters said.
It's just that now there's more help for them.
That's the end of our dramatic presentation for this evening. Thank you very much for your attention. Let our actors to come find their seats, and I know some people are coming in. I'm going to jump right into it. There are folks watching on Zoom. There are folks here in the room. We've just watched these amazing actors with minimal rehearsal try to make sense of Paige's incredible article for WPLN and ProPublica. And I'm excited about tonight because we have folks watching, not just in Tennessee, but all over the country. And one of the aspirations for this project, for this experiment, is could we have national conversations? Could we have a conversation that's grounded in Tennessee and that speaks to New York? And can people in New York speak to people in Tennessee and other parts of the country? So that's the idea. So I'm going to throw this out, this first question, What resonated with you here in this room? What touched you as you listened to Paige's story? What was true? And there's a hand right here. Go right here.
Michael Warren, what resonated is when you listen to what the judge was saying, a lot of times in society, our loved ones is the ones that hurt us the most, and not a stranger. So when you listen to it, you hear that loved ones is hurting the person the most and that it becomes normal. And that's what violence becomes normal. It's not abnormal no more. And it's important to know that violence is a disease. And the only way you're gonna cure it is through resources and healing.
Thank you so much. Does anyone in the room in Scott County want to respond to this question? What resonated with you in hearing it read out loud tonight?
I'll go. So I'm Judge Scarlett Ellis, and I will speak first. One of the things that resonated with me.
This is Judge Ellis. She was featured in Paige's piece, and she was sitting in a classroom in rural Tennessee alongside Jade Peters, the woman who was shot by her former boyfriend.
And our battery prevention program, after they finish halfway through, they are able to share with new members of the court as to what they've learned about how to change their behaviors. There's just story after story we could tell, but what they say is when you first go, Judge Ellis has made you go, you're not going to want to go. You're not going to want to pay that money. You're not going to want to spend 26 Saturdays trying to change a behavior that you don't think needs to be changed. However, 6 or 7 sessions in, you will start to see the benefit.
Thank you so much, Judge. I really appreciate you joining us. I know the one thing you probably didn't resonate with was our attempt at accents. But please know that it was done with the utmost respect and an attempt to bring the spirit of what you said. Does anyone else in Scott County want to respond to what touched you or resonated with you in hearing the reading?
I would. I'm Jade Peters, and I'm an attorney and also a survivor mentioned in the story. I wanted to just say that I agree with what Judge Ellis said. Essentially, these are human beings, and they, after 1 year, are not subject to the order of protection. So that revitalization and progress that they're able to make in those classes is just essential to the outcomes that we're seeing here in Scott County.
Wow, Jade, that's so powerful to hear you say, especially from what we know of your story and what a transformational story it is that you're now a lawyer working on the front lines, the cutting edge of this work. Thank you so much for sharing what resonated with you and for your compassion for perpetrators, which clearly is part of the way forward in Scott County. Isaac, you've been waiting for some time. We're going to go over to you, and then we're going to come back out to our audience here. Isaac, what resonated with you?
My name is Isaac Devine. I'm an assistant public defender in the 32nd Judicial District of Tennessee. And one of my counties, a county I will actually be at tomorrow, is Lewis County in front of Judge Mike Henson. A lot of this resonated with me, and I had the privilege of talking with Paige when she was in the first part of writing this article. I would like to just say on the front end of my experiences with Judge Henson, I want to make clear that he cares very much about this issue. And he cares very much about the people involved in it. Many times, Judge Henson and I have had conversations regarding my clientele, which include domestic abusers and those charged with domestic assault, about what we can do to assist this individual to not be in the position again and to not put these victims into positions again. Unfortunately, as Paige's article points out, we lack many resources in these counties. These batterers intervention classes that I know Judge Ellis's court is doing, our closest one is in Dixon, which if you don't know where Dixon is, it is about an hour taking up a county highway for some of my clients who don't have driver's license or can't afford to get out there, can't afford to take a day off work. Internet capabilities are very limited. So access, I think, is a huge part of this that often gets missed in these rural areas.
Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you bringing a perspective from Lewis County into the room and also someone who's worked with Judge Henson. I'm excited because I think there are people listening from all kinds of counties in Tennessee, and wisdom and perspectives are being shared not just in Tennessee, but in other parts of the country. And we're here to start a dialogue, and I'm glad we're talking across county lines and across state lines. And we're having this national conversation where there's room for everyone's perspective. I really appreciate that. There was a hand over here.
Hi, just that our fate is constantly being decided by men who think they know best.
There's a man who has his hand up over here.
Follow that up.
Obviously, it can work both ways, men to women and women to men. We know this in society. And from personal experience, what resonated was feeling victimized, being the victim, and feeling you don't have any way of sort of getting help, and people not believing you, especially when it goes the opposite direction with women abusers.
Yeah, I appreciate we've crossed this sort of gender threshold and complicated the conversation in really productive ways. I'm going to ask another question. For those who have experienced or witnessed domestic violence or gun violence, how do we stop it? And what does justice look like for those who've been hurt? Somebody had a hand over here. Yeah, go right ahead. Yeah.
This is sort of an answer to that
That's fine.
instead of my own question, but my name is Judy Clark, and I work with an organization called Survivors Justice Project, which works to implement a law that's in New York State that was fought for by survivors, women survivors, who were themselves criminalized and incarcerated out of what they did in response either to those who were victimizing them, but also in response to the pain they had that led to harm in other ways. So I'll say two things. One is that a lot of the women I did time with who experienced domestic violence, they did not want to send people to prison because they knew that was just going to perpetrate it. So I was really interested in the attempt they were having to try to create a more restorative justice approach to it. And the other thing is that we have this idea that there's this clear line between the victims and the perpetrators, and there's no clear line. You know, that victimization leads to doing harm as much as it does. And so, but then when you end up in that situation, you are portrayed only as a perpetrator, and all of those issues don't get looked at. So I think we have to complicate the picture in a lot of ways.
Thank you. You've done a good job of doing that. And also, and that's what we're after, complexity. But I hear you saying that justice does not look like more incarceration necessarily. It can be incarceration, but it doesn't necessarily look like incarceration. And then there's something that you bring into the room, restorative justice. And maybe for victims and survivors, that's a more satisfying type of justice than seeing people hurt or re-victimized who perpetrated violence. That's such a powerful thing to hear you say, and I really appreciate you. Yeah, over here.
Hi, everybody. Ruby here. So I'm a survivor of DV, and I wanted to say, like, what a person can do, like, as an individual. I know there's never money. We're always broke, right? Like, you as an individual can change the language that you use, not just put a label on somebody, you know, because you need to be able to create the space for them to change. The reason now I have a healthy relationship with the father of my child, no longer together, is because I created a space for him to feel heard. You're hurting me. Yes, you're hurting me. And you're hurt. And you're scared. And you're probably mad. You're afraid. I created both spaces, holding them together. Not you're a batterer, you're an abuser. No, you're also loved. You're also a father. You're also a son. You know, and I think creating that and then not isolating the person. Because we're so quick to isolate and put you in this group and that's it, and we're just gonna shun you out. No, I'm gonna welcome you with open arms, even if that's apart from being with me. I don't have to be with you in your process, but I can definitely be in your process, right? And then also teaching your kids. My son tells me all the time, you tell me what not to do. What should I do? You're right. Let me lead by example. And when it comes to the justice system, punishment is punishment, right? But then you need to also have accountability, right? And teach these people what to do.
Those are all beautiful. So there's someone right here.
My name's Jonathan Arroyo. I happen so to be actually a guy that was on a gang indictment and actually came home reformed. And I know that from the resources and the restorative justice and like inside circles and like intense therapy can also prevent gun violence. To be honest with you, the guys that I actually was incarcerated for, we actually work with them now to rebuild the community that we destroyed. You put these resources in these communities and then you can see the results happen itself.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Natalie, you've been waiting for some time. Natalie, what do you want to speak to you?
Yeah, hi, everybody. I am a law professor coming to you from Texas, and I actually also study the intersection of firearms and domestic violence. And so I think what Paige's piece so beautifully shows us is that systems are made up of people. Right. And today we saw the good, the bad, and the ugly of all of the people who make up that system. Right. I think people might assume that judges know the law, understand the law, will apply the law in a way that is equitable and fair. But we hear in Paige's piece judges saying we don't worship the law. Right. But then on the other hand, right, when it suits a particular judge to say, well, you know what? People have Second Amendment rights and we're not going to take them away. And that's just actually the one place that I did want to just make sure everybody was very, very clear that people who have perpetrated domestic violence, whether that's a felony or misdemeanor criminal domestic violence offense, or somebody who's subject to a domestic violence protective order, actually loses that Second Amendment right. So I think is a really, really important piece of this that we need to be thinking about.
Thank you. No, it's great to hear from Texas. It's great to hear from a legal expert, and also to have you laying down some hard realities about gun laws in our country and as they're applied to questions of domestic violence and protection. So I appreciate it. We have time for just a couple more. Katrina, what did you want to speak to?
Thank you so much. I'm an emergency physician in Nashville, Tennessee, and I just wanted to point out that the funding for a lot of these programs has just been abruptly cut off by the current administration. $150 million is going away from the Justice Department grants that fund gun violence prevention programs all across the U.S. So what can you do? Call your congressperson, call your senators, demand to reinstate the funding for these programs that we so desperately need in areas all across the country, because we can't do the work without the funding to do the work.
Thank you so much, Katrina. Over here.
Hello, my name is Shaniqua Purvis, and first of all, we have to acknowledge that guns don't kill people, people kill people. And once we understand that, then we can move forward. There's people that have guns in their house, they're not going outside to shoot nobody. And then there's people who, just have the mindset of, I have to get you before you get me. There's a difference. You understand? Resources, there are none. And everybody's sitting here talking about what we could do. Let's start with prevention. What if in kindergarten they had conflict mediation classes? What if in first grade they had conflict resolution classes? Hello, we have to start with the family. You talking about a problem, there's a tree. You talking about the branches. What about the root? And the root is family. And that's something that we all are synonymous with. Everybody has a family, and we have to start from there. Whoever goes to commit crimes, don't just get up and say, I'm going to kill someone's child today. Something happens. There's signs before this even happened. My sister was murdered by a stray bullet on the first floor 3 days after Christmas, holding my daughter right here when she was 5 months old. 18 years later, I spoke to her, kill her. And now I mentor him. That's both sides of the violence. And what he told me was, I used to be in his house playing cards with his mother. We all was around. It wasn't meant for my sister. But at the end of the day, he didn't wake up that day to say, I'm going to kill somebody. It just happened. So let's start with the root, and that's family.
I'm Brian Dories, and this is Theater of War Productions, presented by WNYC. Stick around.
I'm Paige Schlager, and this is Nashville, a special episode in partnership with Theater of War.
I'm Brian Dories, and you're listening to a live performance of Theater of War Productions, presented by WNYC. We just heard a story of advocates, judges, and survivors who are trying to change what happens around domestic abuse and gun violence in rural communities in Tennessee. At Theater of War Productions, we always invite people with something at stake to our events. We had a group of community members in Scott County, Tennessee, who gathered at a local college to join our discussion via Zoom. Many of them had first-hand experiences with the story we just heard. Here in New York, the audience is filled with advocates, people who'd experienced domestic and gun violence, and people who've caused harm, sometimes with guns. Credible messengers who are trying to make a change in their communities. In the front row, there was a family of 3. A mom sitting with 2 of her adult children, one on each side of her. They were listening to the story of what happened in Scott County and remembering their own experiences in Brooklyn.
Hi, my name is Anna Mae West. This is my brother Percy West and my mom, Audrey West, who was a victim of domestic violence for a very long time in her life. A lot of the times, people, children are going through violence themselves in the homes. And that's if they're experiencing violence and they grow up in a violent home, as well as like what we did, what else do you know? So I think a lot of the times we forget that therapy needs to be, something that's important. We don't discuss therapy. Yes, restorative justice and programs and things like that, but what about talking about your problems, what you went through as a kid, what you're experiencing now, what your children are seeing as well? I'm a New York City correction officer as well, so I've seen a lot. And what I noticed that helps these kids and the youth, adolescents, are programs. It has to be therapy-based, and we go through a lot in our lives in general for those that are non-abusers. So just imagine what they're dealing with, not excusing that. It should also be for the victims as well. Mm-hmm. So everybody needs to be involved in some type of therapy-based programming.
Go right here. Yeah, how you doing? I'm Percy West. What touched me is my mother experienced domestic violence for over 25 years as a result of my father's actions. And it resonated with me because we didn't receive the same belief that, in the court system, as it relates to the police officers showing up, they used to tell my father to go for a walk. And this was the 80s. And they did not do anything for her. So it was like a cycle of continuous abuse because there was no consequences. And I can relate with the fact that in Lewis County, that's how it was in Brooklyn. And so it touches me because it's like I'm listening to it and I'm reliving a story of my mother's life, what happened with and what we experienced growing up and in the household.
So powerful. Thank you. There's so much that divides us in this country, but look at the things that can connect us when we acknowledge that we have shared experiences. I hear you saying there was abuse in your home, and I hear you say it was another abuse to have us be in a system that wouldn't do anything about that abuse, would allow it to be perpetuated over time. And you heard that in the story, and I appreciate that. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, please.
Nobody's mentioned, how do they in Tennessee use substance abuse? Because my husband was an alcoholic and he abused drugs, and for 25 years he was always under some influence and abused me. So I want to know, how do they handle that in Tennessee?
That's a great question. Maybe someone in the room in Scott County could respond to that question of how do these programs respond to substance abuse and addiction as it pertains to preventing domestic violence and gun violence in Scott County?
I'm going to pass it on to Judge Ellis and probably Brooke to talk a little bit about what, from their perspectives, having someone in front of them for domestic violence that also has those other issues. Yes, and there are really 2 paths. Defendants come before the court, and if there's not been an order of protection, then they come into the domestic violence court through that criminal action. But if I grant an order of protection, there's always a mental health assessment. And if there's history of substance abuse, there's also an alcohol and drug assessment. And most of the time, those go hand in hand and are jointly ordered. Then when they come back to the domestic violence court, they have to bring those assessments to me, and then they have to each month bring me something that they have went to their appointments, they're following through, they're cooperating. And I have them in my domestic violence compliance court for a year. I can't order change. That has to come from the individual, and they make the change themselves. I just applaud them for it when they come back before me. that they've been going to their meetings and making the change.
Thank you so much for illustrating how it works in Scott County, especially from a legal perspective. Also, I heard you talking about, again, this main narrative struggle at the center of Paige's story and the conversation we're having tonight. People who have been ordered by a court to change or else face more serious consequences who may or may not change. Can someone here share a story about how you or someone you've loved or known has changed? We go there.
So I'm a product of change, right? Because I was once violent, right? And I had to look in the mirror and see I destroyed my neighborhood. So I went back and restored, and I helped so many kids from 4 to 25, just helping them, making sure they reshape their mind from violence and thinking better. So that's my story, and it's beautiful to see change. You could change within yourself. You gotta look in the mirror, though. You gotta look in the mirror and know that you're doing something wrong.
Thank you so much. We'll go here.
I just want to say that everyone has the capacity to change. You know, my life started rough. I did 33 years in prison. I was sentenced to 132 and a half to life. I gave back time. I was, my prison bid was didn't start good. I changed my life in order to obtain my freedom. And right now, I'm home. I'm doing the right thing. I'm not going backwards. I'm a part of restorative justice. I assist with the youth in the community, the young men, so they can change as well, letting everybody know that they have the capacity to change. You have people languishing in prison right now who have changed. This is why we're pushing a Second Look Act so we can, free them as well. So that needs, So I mean, once you believe in change, you know that we all change. None of us are the same people we were at a younger age, right? And we know that, like Lawrence Steinberg said, he has a study of neuroplasticity, which the brain don't fully develop until you're 24 years old, 25 years old. So at that stage, people change. So I believe we all can change, and whether a victim, a perpetrator of crime, people change and give everybody an opportunity. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jason Bostic. I do think people can change, and echoing what everyone said in this room, I think it's a lot of systems that fail an individual before the incarceration system catch them, or for something as tragic as domestic violence happening. Me, for myself, when I was 9 years old, my father was murdered, and it caused me to go down a spiral. But what was really impacting me was that I was a victim of limited exposure. When I walked outside, it was a sad reality of someone being a substance misuser or someone dealing with domestic violence in their household and then don't have nowhere to use all this trauma that they have inside their body, which will lead to them becoming incarcerated. So fast forward a couple years of my life, spiraling, not knowing what to do, getting to my mom telling me, yo, it's either you get a job or go to school, right? Everything, especially coming from an unprivileged community of Bedford-Stuyvesant, I was like, Ma, I really don't want to go to school and I really don't want to get a job. But this is me being the victim of limited exposure. We didn't know what we was going to do. I didn't have no ID, I didn't have no bank account, and I really didn't have no life. And then my sister was murdered right after that. So I was like, what am I going to do? Like, my life is just spiraling. I don't know what I do. Every problem that someone told me to do is to handle something with violence, right? Until I got some of these programs, until I started getting access, right? Then I was able to get therapy. I was able to go to Inside Circle and begin to heal. And just in 1 year, I was able to get my ID, I was able to get a bank account, I was able to get a 401k, and I was able to become a Columbia University student.
You've been listening to Theater of War Productions, presented by WNYC. Theater of War Productions is me, Brian Dories, and producers Marjolaine Goldsmith, Dominic DuPont, and Adam Isco. Paige Flager reported the story for WPLN and ProPublica. At WNYC, this was produced by Emily Botine, Ryan Wild, Katarina Barton, Jared Paul, Jason Saul, and Kenya Young, and the entire technical team at the Green Space. That's Chase Coulpon, Robert McGinnis, James Cronier, Sean Wee, Marika Hacking, and Rachel Hacking. We want to thank the Laurie M. Tisch Illumination Fund, who made this production possible through their generous financial support. Thank you for listening.
And thanks for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by WNYC, Theater of War Productions, and Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind our theme music are LaRange and Namir Blade. Listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get your podcasts. The conversation doesn't end here. You can comment and tell us what you want to hear on the show by leaving us a message at 615-751-2500. You can also find us on Blue Sky and Instagram and X at This Is Nashville. This is Nashville. I'm Paige Flager, and we'll see you tomorrow.